All right, Callum, take it away.
All right, awesome. Thank you very much, Chris. So welcome to our second last session for our conference over the last couple of weeks. As Chris said, today we'll be having Natasha do a pre-recorded session on kind of overall wellness with a focus on mental health. If you want to either use this recording or you can find this session already on our YouTube at Special Olympics Ontario. But without further ado, I'm going to share the video now. And I hope you guys all enjoy. All right.
Before we begin, I'd just like to read a quick land acknowledgement. We begin by acknowledging that though we're meeting virtually, we're all on a land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples for thousands of years. In particular, we acknowledge that the Special Olympics Ontario office is located on the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations. The land is governed by the Disk of Monsoon Covenant between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Confederacy of Ojibwe and Allied Nations. Today, this meeting is still a place many home Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and they're grateful to have the opportunity to work, live, and play on this land. Thank you. Before we begin, as Julie mentioned, this will be in a webinar format, so we ask you please put your questions in the Q&A. So right at the bottom of your Zoom screen there, you'll see the Q&A feature. We have a guest with us today, Natasha, who's going to speak. She's going to take questions at the end. So at any time, put your questions in the Q&A, and at the end, I'll help relay those questions to Natasha. We also have Julie Grattan from our office, who can answer some questions as well as it relates to Special Olympics. So Natasha will get to her presentation. We'll have a great Q&A at the end. Any more information on the session, you have my email there, but please feel free to ask as many questions as you want and engage fully. And we're very excited about our presentation today. And without further ado, we're thrilled to have Natasha Wesh join us tonight. Natasha is a mental performance consultant, a Canadian certified counselor, and a certified mental health professional who works with athletes, coaches, performing artists, corporations, businesses, and individuals looking to develop their mindset, skills, and performance. An accomplished athlete in their own right, please welcome to the Special Olympics Virtual Volunteer Conference and Mental Health Session, Natasha Wesh. Natasha, all yours.
Great, thank you, Cody. Okay, let me just share my screen here. Okay, so hopefully you guys can see that. And let me just give myself some notes. All right, so can you just see the screen? Thumbs up, Julie, on just the screen. Oh, you disappeared. No. Yes, just the main screen. Awesome. Okay, perfect. All right. So yes, I'm really pleased to be here, and thank you so much for everyone for joining in tonight. As was stated, I'm going to talk a little bit about mental health, and this is Mental Health Awareness Week, I think, and so we're going to talk about the calm state of mind to full shutdown. So what that means is, we're in a calm moment, we're doing well, and then all of a sudden we kind of zip all the way over to this like full-blown meltdown or shutdown, and that happens to everybody. And but we can develop some tools, we can have a better understanding of how that works. And so what I want to be able to do tonight is to help you recognize the emotional stages that we experience, all of them, and then hopefully give you some tools or highlight some tools that we can use to deal with those stages or deal with moving in and out of those stages. So the greatest metaphor for life, at least and even now, the greatest metaphor for life I find is the one about the oxygen masks in an airplane. And we've all heard this before, maybe not for a while, haven't been able to travel for a while, but we've all heard this before. Should the cabin pressure change, oxygen masks will drop from the panel above you. Please place the mask over your mouth and nose before assisting others. So as volunteers, we relish in serving others. We gain energy, find meaning in being of service to others. And being of service, by definition, requires that we give of ourselves, that we put others' needs before our own. And that in and of itself means that often we forget about our own self-care in the process. But there is a reason why that in crisis situations, why we're told to take care of ourselves first before taking care of others. And that's because unless we put on our own mask first, we will not be able to, or be alive to, take care of others. So first, we must take care of ourselves. And we know this in theory, but somehow our culture and even our societal norms have made it that self-sacrifice is actually something that is to be revered and even celebrated. But at what expense? So now I know what you might be thinking, because I've had this thought too, is, well, not me, I'm superhuman. I can go like the Energizer Bunny. Plus, I'm tough. I don't need to do any of that fluffy stuff like self-care and take care of myself. Well, let's put it in other terms that we can all understand. So if you want to deliver the performance of your life, you need to train hard. You need to recover well, and then repeat the whole cycle. There's no performance without hard work paired with hard recovery. So the harder you work, the harder you have to rest. So this evening, what I want to do is give you a few foundational skills that will help you better understand what is mental health and the difference between that and mental illness, as well as the importance of self-care and how you can create your own self-care habits and a game plan to enhance your performance when helping others. So what are mental health and mental illness? I often, hear the terms used interchangeably, and to be honest, I've done so in the past as well. But there are very important differences. So let's begin first by defining our terms. If we look up in the dictionary the definition of health and illness, they paint a pretty actually gloomy picture. So health described as the state of being free from illness or injury, and illness is described as a disease or period of sickness affecting the body or the mind. But health is much more than just being free of illness or of injury. Health is about thriving. It's about living. It's about flourishing. So really, let's define mental health and mental illness. They are two different things. However, they both exist on their own continuum. Okay, so this diagram here is Key's dual continuum model. So the model is one that helps us to recognize that mental health and mental illness are actually distinct but related concepts. So mental health is represented by the vertical line, the up and down line. And at the bottom of the continuum, that represents poor mental health. So when we're languishing, right? Where we're failing to make progress, essentially. At the other end of the continuum is positive mental health, where one is flourishing, is thriving. Then we have the horizontal axis, that runs left to right. And this represents the mental illness continuum. So on the left indicates high levels of mental illness, for example, severe clinical depression. While on the right indicates low levels of mental illness. Sorry, I was trying to read my stuff here and I just lost my cue. So the idea is that, so like I said, on the right-hand side indicates low levels of mental illness, and that could be such as mild depression. So the model demonstrates that you can have a mental illness, but still achieve positive mental health. And on the same side, you can not have a mental illness, but also have poor mental health. So it seems complicated, but maybe I'll give you a different example. So for example, I can have severe depression, which is a mental illness, and take care of myself by adopting a positive self-care routine, such as exercising, meditating, journaling, potentially working with a counselor or a mental health professional. So that will give me good mental health, even though I have a mental illness. On the other hand, I may not have a mental illness, but then again, I don't take care of myself. I stay up late, I don't exercise, I eat out often, I eat whatever I want, highly processed diet. And I engage in maybe negative self-talk habits. So even though I don't have a mental illness, I could still be in a poor mental state. So again, let's put it in physical health and physical illness terms. Sometimes that helps us understand. So first, let's look at the left side of the diagram, where one would have high physical illness. If we replace mental with physical, high physical illness. So I can have diabetes, for example, and still have good physical health, which means that I take care of my health by eating well, sleeping well, exercising, taking my medication, and I can still have diabetes and have positive mental health or physical health and flourish. So that places me in the top left quadrant. Or I can have the same physical illness, diabetes, but not take care of myself. And so I have a high level of physical illness and poor physical health. And that puts me in the bottom left quadrant. So the red square. On the other hand, if we look at the right side of the diagram, I can not have any physical illness or low physical illness. So maybe I have mild allergies, right? And have poor physical health because I don't take care of myself. Again, stay up late, eat poorly, don't exercise, maybe smoke, drink, that is more than what is recommended. I don't know how much smoking is recommended, but it doesn't matter. So that places me in the bottom right quadrant, the yellow box. Or again, I can have low or no physical illness and also take really good care of my health by exercising, doing yoga, eating well, et cetera, et cetera. And this puts me in the top right quadrant. So ideally, I want to be either in one of those two green boxes at the top, because sometimes I may be genetically predisposed to diabetes, for example, or have allergies, but I purposefully take the steps to take good care of my physical health and well-being so that I can thrive. And this is how mental health and mental illness interact. And we're constantly in flow and constantly in motion along either one of those continuums or continua. Just like physical fitness and health, we're not static or always the same. We move along the continuum based on life stresses and how we take care of ourselves. So just because someone has a mental illness does not mean that they cannot thrive and flourish. Similarly, just because someone does not have a mental illness, that alone doesn't guarantee that they will thrive. They have to take care of their mental health. So hopefully you can see that we want to engage in good self-care habits that will lead to positive mental health. Good mental health means that we have a stronger mental or psychological immune system that then allows us to manage the stresses of life. So what does this all mean? When we talk about self-care, it's a term typically used in the context of mental health. So if we think of it this way, self-care is to mental health what toothbrushing is to dental health, right? It's the small daily habits that over time lead to good health and a bright smile. In the sports world, as athletes, most of us are pretty good at doing the little things right that will allow us to be ready for the big game, right? We even go as far as investing all of our time, our energy, and resources into being the best that we could be. Why? Because we want to perform and we want to succeed. We don't want to leave anything to chance. And I always say that sport is life sped up. In sport, we can dedicate weeks, months, and even years preparing, training, sacrificing for that one big event. We often even have a bunch of smaller competitions or events where we get to hone our skills, try different things, figure out what works and what doesn't work. And we take great care to ensure we eat well, sleep well, train, and have a sense of community, that team, that belonging, because we know that these things give us the best chance of success when it comes to performing. So we know this as athletes. We know this as sports people. We do this and we've all done this, or at least most of us have. But what about the main event? What about your life? What about, the same rules apply. So the same rules that apply to sport performance apply to the most important performance there is, life. And we only get one of those. So why not put the same energy into being the best we can be for that, especially when it comes to supporting others who are trying to be the best that we can be? that they can be, right? The idea of if we're going to support others, if we're going to help others as volunteers, we need to be the best that we can be in order to allow other people to be the best that they can be. So, all right, so what is self-care? So self-care is establishing the small daily habits that care for this one body, this one mind that we have. We get one go at this. We get one go round, right? We only get this one mind and body. So I want to be the best that I can be. I want to be able to do everything and anything that life throws my way, or at least give myself the best chance of that. So my best bet, our best bet, is to keep our mind and body tuned up. And that's where the self-care comes in, right? So funny enough, the same things we do as athletes, habits that we need to adopt for the slowed down version of sport, which is life, it's about adopting those small daily habits for the long haul. So making sleep a priority and a routine, choosing food to fuel the body and the mind, maintaining strong social ties. All of these are basic self-care choices that, when repeated over time, become habits. Each one influences our physical health and our mental health. When we're at the top and end of the mental health continuum, we can flourish and thrive. And when we thrive, we can support others. So put your mask on before assisting others. Just start with one step, one thing to which you will bring a bit more attention and intention. So that's the foundation, right? But like sport, you don't just train once and then that's it. You keep coming back, you keep doing the little things, you keep reevaluating, sometimes adapting based on the time of the season, the opponent. But what remains the same is the foundation. You keep working on the foundational skills. And at the base is a strong foundation made up of sleep, nutrition, hydration, movement, and social connection. So, like sport, life isn't just a straight line. There are outside factors that nudge us or even knock us off our path, right? If you look at the photo here, the individual on the paddleboard, you can go along on your paddleboard, but there are going to be outside forces, waves, wind, whatever. And these are the stressors of life, and there are many of them. We will inevitably face various stressors throughout our lifetime. Sometimes we can avoid them, but sometimes we simply have to show up prepared with a strong enough foundation to ward off the stresses. Or alternatively, we may need to be flexible and adaptable enough to bend, but not break. Well, yet at other times, of course, we take a blow and then we have to reboot and recharge so that we can get back on track, right? The key to all of this is to recognize when we've been knocked off our path, or to recognize when we might be heading into turbulent phase or turbulent waters, and to know how to prepare and to come back to safety. So we create a plan. So I'm going to explain the traffic light zones of self-care and stress to you. So this diagram is actually used to help manage depression, but I find it very useful to help athletes, coaches, and individuals understand how stress and mental health and self-care are related. So let's first look at this from the perspective of sport performance. I always like to bring things back to the physical perspective because we tend to understand that really, really well. So think about training in a sport, in your sport. Let's take, for example, running. All right. So the green zone is the comfort zone. When things are comfortable, they're manageable. I'm just strolling along. I can spend a lot of time here. Maybe it's a quick walk or a light jog, right? My capacity in this zone is quite high. It's, in a way, it's like recovery run, like I said, or a light jog. You can hang out in this zone for pretty much forever. So, but then the orange zone, that's the challenge zone. When things are a little bit tougher, as athletes, we know how to get into this zone, and we often spend a large amount of our training in this zone, right? As athletes, we do this. This is where we push the boundaries. This is where we go in order to get better. We push those things. They're tough, and we know we've learned over a lifetime of being athletes how to be there. Right? This capacity, or the capacity in this zone, is moderate, which means that we can spend time here, but eventually we'll need to recover. We'll need to go back to that green zone. we'll need to allow the body to get into repair mode so that the damage we do in the orange zone gets repaired, and the body then adapts to this training or these stresses. And then lastly, the red zone. Like the red zone is like this full out sprint. It's the maximal effort, the really heavy zone. We can go there. In fact, as athletes, we've learned to ignore the physical cues that tell us that this is a danger zone. We can step into this zone, but our capacity to stay in this zone is quite low. We can go there, but not for long. And then when we do go there, we need lots of recovery time. We need to move back into orange and then in green. So as athletes, we understand the physical signs and symptoms that tell us when we're getting into each one of these zones. Green zones, things are easy. I can joke and laugh. We train, the body feels good. We can learn new things maybe, but it's comfortable. We're doing things that we've always done. The orange zone, again, a bit more purposeful. We know there will be discomfort. Our body is under stress, but we train ourselves to manage it and even to enjoy it to a certain extent. Red zone, that's painful. And we know that too much time here will result in damage that we'll pay for later. So through physical training, we develop the self-awareness to know when we're in each zone, when we need to back off, when we need to move back into the recovery zone. And we learn to recognize when we're moving from one zone to the other. We know this in terms of our physical fitness. But what about mental, emotional, psychological signs and symptoms that tell us when we're in each zone when it comes to our mental fitness, our mental health? So this is a vital skill, recognizing your emotional and psychological signs and symptoms that tell you when you are in each zone. This is important. When are you moving from one zone to the next? When are you approaching the red zone? And when are you in the red zone? And this is a key aspect of mental health and mental illness. One can, once you can recognize the signs and symptoms, you'll be able to take action to ensure that you maintain or even enhance your mental health and your mental fitness. So think about this. What are the things that you do daily to enhance your performance as a human being? What are the things that you do daily to care for your mind, your body, your soul, your spirit? And where you care for those aspects of yourself, you give yourself the best chance of success, right? So again, it's building our psychological immune system so that we can ward off the stresses of life. Well, sometimes there are things that push us into these zones. So let's look at some of those emotional and psychological signs and symptoms for each of those zones. And think for yourself how they match up to your own signs and symptoms. So again, when I'm in the green zone, for me, I'm thriving. Well, we all are when we're in our green zone. Your mood is stable. For me, I'm sleeping well, eating well. I feel positive, hopeful, optimistic. I'm able to concentrate. I have a healthy appetite. I'm energetic. I'm fully realizing my potential. I know I'm in my green zone. Things are good. Things are easy. I'm doing my stuff. I'm able to stay on track. When I'm in the orange zone, however, I'm in more of a survival mode. I'm irritable, not sleeping well, maybe. I have a hard time falling asleep. I'm scatterbrained. Maybe I'm not eating well, eating too much junk food because I'm feeling scatterbrained. So I kind of get drawn to the junk. I have trouble concentrating, lacking energy, etc. Right? So I know that, I recognize that. And when I'm approaching the red zone or I'm in the red zone, that's when I know I'm about to be or I am in crisis. I feel overwhelmed. I'm super stressed. I can't concentrate on anything. I'm irritable. I feel like there's no end in sight. I just can't seem to find any positive in anything. And I feel like I just want the world to stop just for a while so I can catch up. Right? I'm overwhelmed by feelings of sadness often. I feel hopeless or helpless. I'm not eating, I'm not sleeping, I can't get out of bed, right? We've all been there. But the key to this is to have this stuff written down so that when I'm in the throes of life, right, I can look at my signs and symptoms sheet and recognize where I am. It's my mental game plan. And we need to have this. We have this as athletes. But we need to have this as individuals for our everyday life. And especially as volunteers, when we're trying to look after others, we need to be at our best. So we need to know when we're moving from one zone to the other. right? So I encourage you to write down your signs and symptoms. Don't leave it to chance. So the other key to my mental game plan is that I've taken the time to identify what self-care and coping strategies I can and need to use when I'm in each of those zones, right? So for example, I'm in the green zone, and this is where my self-care is at its optimum. It's easy. I have a self-care routine that I've developed over time and that I continue to practice and refine. It's taking me a while, right? So for example, I meditate daily or almost every day. And even if it's just for 5 minutes, but that wasn't something that I was born with, and then I started meditating when I was like 0 or 1. It's something that I've developed over time. I learned to do this. The other thing is I walk or hike daily, even if it's just 10 minutes around the block. I work out daily. That's also part of my self-care foundation, right? I write in a journal pretty much daily, but I'm not perfect. Nobody is. So sometimes my journaling is as basic as me writing the date and making a big sad face, or listing out all of the emotions that I'm feeling on that day. Or sometimes it's, I vent daily. I know that sounds horrible, but my family and I, we allow each other as often as possible to have this 5-minute venting session when we need it, right? And we allow each other to vent, and the others just listen, no comment. Then once we've had that time to vent, we just move on, right? We let the dust settle, and then we move on and have a dinner conversation. Sleep is my superpower, right? I try to prioritize my sleep. I have shutdown alarm or reminder set on my phone so that I can get to bed on time. And I usually have a little bedtime routine, just like I did for my daughter when she was really, really young. The routine sets us up for success. And no, I'm not perfect. And some days, some nights, I stay up really late preparing presentations, right? So the idea is that the thing is that, I also know that sometimes I'm going to be in that orange zone, and I'm going to have a lot on my plate, and so I prepare, I put space in my calendar for those habits that really recharge me. And I look ahead. It's like knowing that playoff season is coming and I need to plan accordingly. When I know I'm going to have a stressful time, or I'm going to be moving into that orange zone, I plan, right? So for me, that's hiking, being with my family, sleep, right? And when I'm in that orange zone, I carve out the time in my calendar to go maybe on a longer hike or for a couple of hours. Or if I know I'm going to be going to an event as a volunteer, I make sure that I plan how I'm going to recharge, because that is an orange zone, and that potentially throws me into the red zone. So I plan ahead. I tell myself, what are the things that I'm going to do? And I put it in my schedule and I stick to it. That's my self-care plan, to make sure that I make it through that orange zone and make it through, if I need to be in the red zone, that I can survive, right? So these are all things that allow me to mentally and emotionally get back into my green zone, or where I can better manage the stresses of life, right? So that's important. So when faced with challenges, or when moving from green to orange to red, we can be proactive or we could be reactive. And sometimes we're both. Either we plan ahead and insert recharge strategies on purpose, or we react when things change. We can do both. It's easier to plan ahead then to respond, right? Rather than react when we're under stress. So like I said, if I know I'm going to be going into playoff season or a big event and a volunteer at a big games, I'm going to plan ahead. I'm going to make sure that I set my foundation now, that I'm rested, and that I do all the things to build my psychological immune system right now, so that I am as strong as possible going into those games. But for those games, I plan what I'm going to do to make sure that I recharge, that I reconnect once in a while, right? So it's easier to plan ahead and then respond, like I said, than react when we're under stress. But sometimes we can't plan ahead for stress. It just happens, right? Like a fourth lockdown, it just happens, right? So we have to have those strategies in place. It's important to know what coping strategies are available, and then to refine this and know which ones work best for you. We can use either positive coping strategies or what is called negative coping strategies. Now, I want to be clear, because negative coping strategies doesn't mean never to be used, doesn't mean they're bad. It just rather it's to be used in acute setting, or in other words, for a quick release, but not long term. So I've relabeled the list here as effective and effective in the short term. So short-term effective coping strategies. So we can see in the table here a list of those strategies. Now, this is not an exhaustive list. These are just some examples, right? So this table right here, we can see that there are effective coping strategies, and they're useful, and they can be used by anyone, but not everyone is going to use every single one of these, right? You have to figure out what works for you. It's like your toolbox of coping strategies. You might prefer a hammer over a screwdriver, and you might prefer a hammer for everything. You might prefer a saw for certain things. Like, it depends what works for you and what your tendencies are. But the more tools you explore, the more tools you get to know and you practice, the more you'll have available to you. Right? So deep breathing, stretching, meditation, and listening to music, going for a walk, reading, taking a bath, all of these things. I can read the whole list, but they're all there. Those are things that tend to be quite effective at any time. But it doesn't mean that we only use one, right? Like when we're building a house, I don't only use a hammer. I use other things. Not that I've ever built a house, but I use other things, I would imagine. Then there are the short-term effective strategies, right? Yelling or venting. I talked about venting already, right? I vent sometimes, but that's not all I do. I give myself the time, I do it, and then I cut it off. That's it. It's done, right? So social media scrolling, sometimes that's good to disconnect. But if that's all you do, that's not a mental health strategy. That's not a coping strategy, at least not an effective one long term. When we withdraw or isolate ourselves from friends and family, and God knows we've been forced to do that, but sometimes that's something that we need. We kind of, when things are tough, we need to step away. When we're in those big games, volunteer experiences where we need to just be in our room for 5 minutes by ourselves to just breathe, that's okay. But we don't want to lock ourselves in there. That's not long-term a great coping strategy. So, there's effective, and then there's effective in the short term. You need to build your toolbox for mental self-care, psychological coping strategies, and know what are the things that you're going to do regularly that are going to keep your foundation strong, that are going to keep your mental fitness active and your mental health in tip-top shape. And what are the things that you're going to put in place on purpose when you know you're going into those challenging zones? What are the things that you're going to do when you know playoff season is coming up? You know that you're heading into that orange zone, or even potentially that red zone, that crisis zone, right? So which strategies do you use? Which ones can you try out or practice? Again, relate it back to sport. We learn new skills to help us perform better. Over the course of your sport career, have you always used the same set of skills, or did your coach help you learn new skills, new strategies to enhance your performance or take it to another level? So same goes with mental skills and coping strategies. Build your mental and emotional toolbox of skills and strategies. And now's the time to do it. What better time than now? So self-care is defined as the practice of taking an active role in protecting one's own well-being and happiness, in particular during periods of stress. As athletes and people in sport, we take a lot of care to be the best athletes we can be, right? We've all been in that place at one time, right? As I said before, we take an active role in training, in developing the skills, the strategies, the physical aspects of our bodies to prepare us to face the athletic challenges, to face the stressors of sports. We have fairly specific routines that we follow as athletes, or we've had as athletes. We go to great lengths to control the controllables when it comes to athletic performance, yet we don't necessarily approach our general life in this way, at least not as a regular practice. Sometimes we do it when we've hit rock bottom because we have no other choice, when we're so fatigued, worn out, burnt out, stressed out, that taking care of ourselves is our only option, right? So, but what I'm proposing today is to approach your self-care and mental health in the same way that you approach your training and physical health as an athlete or as a sports person. In sport, do you wait until you're in the depths of pressure and combat to start training, to begin your preparation? Of course not. That would be ludicrous. That would be unheard of. You wouldn't wait until the night before the championships to start training your forehand or to get started in the weight room, right? You'd be proactive. You'd have a plan of when you'll do what. In fact, you'd start months out to ensure you established a strong foundation that you could rely on come finals, right? So the take-home messages here are this. 1, establish good mental health. And that takes time and some effort. But it's all about small daily choices that lead to habits that eventually build your psychological immune system. 2, examining your own habits is an important first step in developing a self-care plan. How do you typically deal with life's demands? Can you identify when you need to take a break? Those are things that are important. That self-awareness is key. 3, recognizing the psychological signs and symptoms of each zone and when you move through those zones is critical to being the best that you can be in your life performance. You need to know where you are, what you need to do in order to be the best that you can be in each one of those zones, and when you need to come back to the green zone, and what does that green zone look like? And then finally, 4, as volunteers, we are charged with being of service to others, to help others be the best they can be. And that means we have to take care of ourselves first, right? Put your mask on first before assisting others. So I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions, to answer questions, because I left it at the end. I wanted to make sure that I got through this first, and then open it up to questions and to any comments or even takeaways that you might have. So
we do
yeah.
have one question in the comments.
Yes.
And June Shaw asked, how are you able to identify mental health in someone that's nonverbal?
Right. So great question. And I think one of the big things is being able to recognize what are their tendencies, right? We talked about signs and symptoms. Those signs and symptoms can be similar, but they're not always the same. But it's knowing that person, right? Like there are some people, if we look at nonverbal or even verbal in generic sport, whatever, we get to know the individual and we start to recognize the patterns. That is the critical thing, is recognizing the patterns in somebody else. So some people are introverted, some people are extroverted, some people like hanging out with people. When they get stressed, they talk more, don't talk more, they shut down, they open up, they do certain things. So it's recognizing habits. That's the critical piece. And as a coach or a volunteer or someone working with someone who is nonverbal, you may need, and we tend to do that anyways, we may need to look to others who know that individual and to ask for, what are some of those signs and symptoms? How can we recognize when this individual is in need of taking care of themselves and establishing different self-care habits? And what are those self-care habits to make sure that they are in moving towards mental health? So hopefully that makes sense and that answers the question, right? So the idea is we all have our patterns, we all have our signs, our symptoms, and to be able to recognize that in somebody else means that we have to get to know them. We have to get to know their signs and symptoms, and that requires us to potentially ask others who may know them better, or find a way to communicate with them to find out what works for them, and go through that process of, okay, when you're in the red zone, what is that like? How do you know? when you're in the green zone, what is that like? How do you know? How do I know? And finding ways to find out that information.
Okay. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening. I think that was a really useful and important and I think really relevant topic, especially now with going through the pandemic and things like that. But I hope you guys are able to take something from this and apply it in your classrooms. Chris, do you have anything to add on?
No, thanks for that, Colin. That's a great session, and Natasha's a great mental health professional, and she has a website as well, which we'll send out in our follow-up email for the conference. And so you can check out some of her other work that she's done. So she's really, really good, and she does a lot of work with Special Olympics and our athletes. So thank you once again for taking the time to spend with us this evening. And we have one more session, which is our closing session, which I encourage you to come out to on Thursday at 7 o'clock. Thank you so much, and we're looking forward to seeing you then.